There will come a point in a Scorpio man's life when he encounters a woman who does not fit into any category he has come to understand. At first glance, she seems almost deceptively simple. There's something understated about her. It shows in the way she carries herself, the way she speaks, and the quiet confidence woven into her presence. She seems self contained, as though her world is already complete. Because of that, he assumes she'll be easy to read. After all, Scorpio men are known for seeing beneath the surface. They pride themselves on detecting what others hide, sensing the unspoken, and understanding the emotional currents running beneath a person's words. He's met plenty of women before, women who revealed themselves quickly, who were eager to be chosen, whose motives became clear with time. But this woman feels different from the very beginning. The moment he notices her, something in him becomes alert. He cannot fully explain it. It is in her presence, her energy, the subtle sense that there is far more beneath the surface than she is willing to reveal. Naturally, he moves closer. Maybe he finds a reason to start a conversation. Maybe he watches from a distance for a little while longer. Either way, he expects her to unfold the way so many others have. But the moment she begins to speak, he realizes he may be in deeper than he anticipated. There is a rare honesty in her words, a level of self-awareness that immediately sets her apart. She does not seem interested in impressing anyone. She simply tells the truth, and that truth has weight. It becomes clear that this is not a woman seeking validation. She knows who she is, she knows what she has lived through, and most importantly, she knows what she will and will not allow into her life. For a Scorpio man, this is both captivating and deeply unsettling, because beneath his intense exterior is a profound desire to encounter someone real, someone who cannot be manipulated, rushed, whose inner world remains her own. He senses that this woman is not an open door, she is a locked one. And the more he feels what might exist behind that door, the more impossible she becomes to forget. What begins as attraction slowly turns into fascination. And fascination for Scorpio has a way of becoming something much deeper. Because every Scorpio man eventually meets a woman who awakens parts of him he did not know were there. And if he is not prepared for what she stirs within him, she will become more than a passing memory. She will become the woman who haunts him. Chapter 1: The Woman He Cannot Explain. There are certain women a Scorpio man can understand almost immediately. Subtle shifts in body language tell him more than words ever could. Intentions reveal themselves, desires surface, fears become visible. Even the things someone is unconsciously seeking have a way of making themselves known to him. This ability to see beneath the surface is one of his greatest strengths. It gives him a quiet sense of confidence. No matter how mysterious someone may appear on the outside, he trusts that with enough time and enough attention, the truth will eventually reveal itself. And most of the time, it does. But every so often, he encounters someone who defies that instinct, someone who cannot be neatly categorized, whose presence feels familiar and foreign at the same time. The more he observes her, the more questions arise. She is not emotionally chaotic, yet she is deeply feeling, kind but discerning, warm but not overly accessible. There is an unusual coherence to her. Nothing about her seems fragmented. Whether she is alone or surrounded by others, she remains herself. Whether praised or overlooked, whether someone chooses her or walks away, she remains herself. That consistency is rare, And because it is rare, he notices. At first, he may underestimate her. Her simplicity can be misleading. There's no visible attempt to captivate anyone. No carefully constructed image. She is simply living in alignment with herself. Something is disarming about a woman who has nothing to prove. Someone comfortable in her own skin. Someone who does not need to announce her value because she embodies it so naturally. To many people, she may seem understated. Small details begin to stand out. The quiet confidence in the way she moves, the thoughtful honesty in her words, the subtle signs that she has lived through enough to know what truly matters. Why she affects him is not something he can fully explain. On paper, there may be nothing dramatic, no grand declarations, no obvious pursuit, no clear invitation, and still something about her lingers. She occupies his thoughts longer than expected. Conversations replay in his mind what she said and what she left unsaid. This is the beginning of the fascination. Because for Scorpio Man, mystery is not merely attractive, it is magnetic. And when that mystery is paired with authenticity, integrity, and emotional substance, it becomes nearly impossible to ignore. His curiosity awakens in the deepest way. Chapter 2: The Woman Who Has Been Through Fire. There is a certain depth that cannot be imitated. You do not find it in books. Age alone cannot create it, and it certainly does not come from trying to appear mysterious. This kind of depth is forged through experience, through loss, betrayal, the moments that force a person to rebuild themselves from the ground up. When a Scorpio man encounters a woman like this, he senses it almost immediately. Something in her energy feels seasoned, not hardened, not bitter, but refined. She carries herself with the quiet steadiness of someone who has seen what life is capable of and has chosen not to let it diminish her. Kindness is no longer indiscriminate, it is discerning. Trust is no longer given freely, it is earned. This is the kind of woman who understands boundaries, not as a way to keep love out, but as a way to protect what is sacred. Often through painful experience, she has learned that not everyone deserves unrestricted access to her inner world. And because of that, she is careful. She listens closely, observes how people handle the smallest moments, notices inconsistencies, pays attention to what is said and what is avoided. A Scorpio man respects this even if it challenges him. He recognizes that her boundaries were not created to play games. They were built through lived experience, shaped by lessons she had no choice but to learn, and that makes them meaningful. There's a subtle gravity to a woman who has endured difficult chapters and still remains open-hearted. Someone who still believes in love without romanticizing it, who offers warmth but refuses to abandon herself to keep someone else comfortable, who still hopes for connection without sacrificing her peace. That balance is extraordinarily powerful. It tells him she is not seeking rescue. She has already rescued herself. Nor is she looking for someone to complete her. She is looking for someone mature enough to honor what she has built. This can be deeply humbling for a Scorpio man because beneath his intensity is a profound respect for resilience. He is drawn to those who have faced their own darkness, those who know what it means to lose something important and continue forward with greater wisdom. And in her, he senses a survivor, someone who has walked through emotional fire and emerged more centered, more discerning, and more whole. That realization deepens his fascination. Slowly, he begins to understand that her guardedness is not emotional unavailability. It is earned caution. Her selectiveness is not coldness, it is self respect. The composure he sees is not detachment, it is the peace of someone who has done significant inner work. Chapter 3: The High Vibration Woman Who Awakens His Shadow. There is a common assumption that a healthy, emotionally grounded woman will bring out only the best in a man, that her presence will feel calming, stabilizing, healing, and in many ways that is true. But what people often overlook is that genuine emotional health does not merely soothe, it illuminates. Whatever has been hidden in the shadows suddenly becomes much harder to ignore. When a Scorpio man encounters a woman who is deeply centered, something significant begins to happen within him. At first, he feels drawn to her steadiness, her calm presence, the quiet confidence of someone rooted in something he cannot easily disrupt. Being around her feels different. There's a purity to her energy, a coherence, a level of self possession that is both comforting and disarming. Over time, however, that very stability begins to expose the parts of him that remain unresolved. Fear of rejection, the need for control, the tendency to test people before trusting them, the habit of guarding vulnerability behind intensity. She does not provoke these traits intentionally. She simply reflects what is already there, and that reflection can be profoundly unsettling. Because when someone is genuinely secure within themselves, there is nothing for him to manipulate, no obvious insecurity to exploit, no desperation to hook into, no emotional chaos to distract him from his own inner landscape. Instead, he is left face to face with himself. This is one of the most misunderstood dynamics in relationships. Sometimes the people who trigger us most deeply are not toxic. They are simply healthy enough to expose what we have not yet healed. And for a Scorpio man whose life path is fundamentally tied to transformation, this can be both painful and profoundly meaningful. Chapter 4: The Curiosity That Turns into Obsession. For a Scorpio man, attraction rarely remains on the surface. What begins as a passing interest often deepens into something far more consuming, a need to understand, to investigate, and uncover what lies beneath what is immediately visible. That is simply part of his nature. Appearances are never enough. He wants to know what shaped a person, what they fear and desire, what they reveal only to those they truly trust. When he meets a woman who feels unusually self contained, that instinct grows even stronger. At first, his curiosity seems harmless. He pays closer attention. Details others overlook become impossible for him to miss. Patterns begin to emerge in her words and behavior. The subtle ways she reveals herself, the books she reads, the values she quietly hints at. The moments when her guard softens, even the stories she chooses not to tell. Because she does not overshare, every small revelation carries weight. A single vulnerable comment, a passing reference to her past, a brief glimpse into the life she has lived beyond his view. Each discovery feels like another piece of something larger. He senses that her inner world contains a depth he has only begun to understand. Naturally, he wants to know more. He may search for her online, notice the traces she leaves behind, look for fragments that help him form a fuller picture of who she is. But if she is private, his curiosity only intensifies. There are fewer answers than he expects, fewer openings, more unanswered questions, and unanswered questions are fertile ground for obsession. Before long, his own mind begins filling in the blanks. He wonders what she has endured, what shaped her discernment, what it would take for her to trust someone completely. Conversations replay in his mind. Her tone is analyzed. Small interactions begin to carry more meaning than they probably should. By this point, his fascination is no longer driven by attraction alone. It has become emotional investment. The more elusive she remains, the more psychologically significant she becomes, not because she is intentionally withholding, but because she reveals herself selectively and authentically. Over time, that curiosity can evolve into a private preoccupation. This was not what he intended, but she has become psychologically significant. She represents mystery, challenge, emotional depth, all at once. And for a Scorpio man, that combination is extraordinarily difficult to forget. What began as curiosity has slowly become something far more powerful. Fixation, a longing, a persistent need to understand the woman who revealed just enough to captivate him while keeping the deepest parts of herself sacred. Once that happens, she no longer occupies a passing thought. She becomes a permanent presence in his inner world. Chapter 5. For the first time, he must earn trust. There is a subtle shift that occurs when a Scorpio man realizes he is no longer in familiar territory. In many of his past experiences, attraction followed a predictable pattern. Interest was expressed. The emotional dynamic developed quickly. Before long, he had a clear sense of where he stood. He was accustomed to being the person others worked to understand, the one whose trust had to be earned, who decided how much access another person would receive. With this woman, however, the dynamic feels fundamentally different. For perhaps the first time in a long while, he senses that he is the one being observed, quietly evaluated, his consistency measured over time. Intensity alone does not impress her. Chemistry is not enough, and attraction is never mistaken for trust. To her, trust is something far more substantial. It is built slowly through repeated actions, emotional honesty, through evidence that someone can respect her boundaries and handle her inner world with care. A Scorpio man may find this unexpectedly humbling. He is used to being perceptive, used to sensing what others want from him. Now his attention turns inward. He finds himself wondering what she sees when she looks at him, what conclusions she has drawn, whether she sees someone worthy of deeper access. That uncertainty is both unsettling and deeply compelling. When a woman is selective with her trust, every small sign of openness begins to matter. A slightly longer conversation, a more personal disclosure, a softening in her tone. Each moment carries weight because none of it is given automatically. Gradually, he realizes she is not testing him in a manipulative sense. She is simply discerning. Experience has taught her that trust should be extended carefully, and she intends to protect the peace she has worked hard to build. That changes the emotional landscape. Charm alone is no longer enough. Attraction guarantees nothing. What she is unwilling to accelerate cannot be rushed. Instead, patience must be demonstrated, consistency, integrity, the quiet qualities that reveal who someone truly is over time. For a Scorpio man, this process can awaken a level of respect that casual connections rarely inspire. Anything that must be earned feels more valuable. Anything that cannot be forced commands his full attention. Along the way, he may notice something unexpected within himself, a desire to become better, to show up more honestly, to prove, not through words, but through actions, that he is capable of honoring the trust she protects so carefully. That desire is deeply significant. It marks the moment his attraction begins to evolve into something more meaningful. She is no longer simply someone he wants. She becomes someone whose respect matters, whose opinion carries weight, whose trust feels worth the effort. And that changes everything. Once a Scorpio man encounters a woman who does not hand him access, but invites him to earn it, the connection takes on an entirely different significance. It becomes less about conquest and more about character, and more about whether he can become the kind of man she would feel safe opening up to. Chapter 6: The Locked Door. By this point, a Scorpio man has come to understand something important about her. She is not closed off, not emotionally unavailable, and certainly not playing hard to get. Neither, however, is she an open book. There's a difference between secrecy and privacy, between guardedness and discernment, between withholding and self-respect. She is not trying to create mystery. She simply understands that the most valuable parts of her inner world are not meant to be handed over casually. That is what makes her feel like a locked door, not a door that is permanently shut, not one with no one behind it, but a door that opens only when trust, safety, and consistency have been established. To a Scorpio man, it feels magnetic because he senses that what lies behind that door is real, a depth of feeling, a private history, a softer side revealed only to those who have proven they can hold it with care. Rather than feeling excluded, he feels challenged. And challenge, when paired with genuine emotional substance, has a way of capturing his full attention. She answers honestly but selectively. That mystery lingers. She understands that true intimacy unfolds gradually. It cannot be demanded, rushed, and it cannot be extracted through sheer intensity. For a Scorpio man, he is accustomed to penetrating emotional defenses, to sensing vulnerabilities others never verbalize, to earning access through persistence and emotional depth. With her, however, there is a boundary he cannot force his way beyond. The key remains in her hands. That realization carries profound psychological significance. No matter how strong his attraction becomes, her inner world belongs to her first. If the door ever opens, it will be because she feels safe. Not because she was pressured and overwhelmed, and certainly not because she feared losing him. That is one of the qualities he finds most unforgettable. She could have opened sooner. She could have mistaken chemistry for trust. She could have offered unrestricted access. Instead, she honored her own pace, her own boundaries, and own inner knowing. In doing so, she became even more significant to him, because a door that opens slowly feels sacred. Each glimpse beyond it feels earned. Each moment of trust carries extraordinary weight. Chapter 7: She Sees the Darkness. He Hides. One of the most unsettling experiences for a Scorpio man is realizing that someone can truly see through him. Not the polished version he presents to the world, and not the carefully controlled exterior, but the parts of himself he rarely reveals, the fears, contradictions, vulnerabilities, and impulses he keeps hidden. Most people catch only glimpses. They sense his intensity, but never fully understand what lies beneath it. In many ways, that works to his advantage. It allows him to remain somewhat mysterious, somewhat protected, and in control. But this woman is different. She notices more than he expects. She picks up on what goes unsaid. She senses the tension behind his composure. She recognizes both his strengths and the wounds that shape them. Yet, what affects him most is not simply that she sees these things, it is how she responds to them. She does not expose or shame him, nor does she weaponize what she perceives. She simply understands. There is a quiet compassion in the way she holds what she sees, a rare ability to sit with complexity without needing to exploit it. For a Scorpio man, that can feel profoundly intimate, perhaps even more intimate than overt declarations of affection, because to be seen clearly and still treated with care is one of the deepest forms of acceptance. At the same time, it is deeply unnerving. He realizes the emotional defenses he has relied upon are far less effective with her. The subtle tests, strategic distance, attempts to maintain control, none of them go unnoticed. That awareness changes the dynamic. He can no longer assume his motives remain hidden, nor can he pretend his behavior escapes her notice. She sees both the man he presents to the world and the internal struggles beneath. He senses that if he were ever to let her in completely, she would understand him in ways few others ever have. She would see the darker corners of his psyche, the insecurities, possessiveness, and the longing to be deeply known. And rather than recoiling, she might simply hold those truths with remarkable steadiness. For a Scorpio man, that possibility is both alluring and destabilizing. It touches one of his deepest desires to be seen completely and still accepted, yet it also confronts one of his greatest fears, that true intimacy leaves him emotionally exposed. This is part of what makes her so unforgettable. She did not merely admire his strengths, she recognized the parts of him he worked hardest to conceal, and she treated those parts with discretion. She held what she saw without ever using it as leverage. That kind of emotional maturity is exceedingly rare. Once a Scorpio man experiences it, he understands this connection is operating on an entirely different level. Because being desired is one thing, being understood is another. But being seen and met with quiet compassion, that is the kind of experience that lingers in a man's psyche long after the relationship itself becomes uncertain. And for a Scorpio man, there are few things more haunting than a woman who saw the darkness he hid and was never afraid of it. Chapter 8: The Woman He Could Not Decenter. There is a subtle desire that can emerge when a Scorpio man becomes deeply invested in a woman. He wants to matter. As someone who occupies a significant place in her emotional world, he wants to know his presence affects her, that he has become more than just another person in her life. In healthy relationships, that desire is natural. Everyone wants to feel important to the person they care about, but when a Scorpio man feels intensely drawn to a woman who remains firmly rooted in herself, that desire can take on added significance. He may begin to hope that he becomes her primary focus, the person around whom her thoughts, emotions, and her decisions revolve. Yet with this woman, something feels different. She values him. She may feel the connection deeply, but she never abandons her center. Her emotional world does not become organized around his presence. Life continues with quiet stability. Her routines, priorities, boundaries, and foundation she has built within herself. That can feel both admirable and frustrating. And one of the qualities that challenges him most deeply, her autonomy reminds him that love does not require self-abandonment. Connection does not require surrendering one's identity. intimacy does not demand the loss of personal sovereignty. She is capable of caring for him deeply while maintaining a clear sense of self. That kind of emotional balance is something he rarely encounters. Part of him may want to test it, to discover how much influence he truly has, to see whether he could ever become indispensable to her. Yet she does not respond by losing her footing. The more pressure she feels, the more she returns to herself, not to create distance, but to preserve her emotional equilibrium. That dynamic stirs something powerful within him, and a growing awareness that she cannot be emotionally consumed. She belongs to herself first. And while he may long to become central in her world, he also realizes he will never replace the foundation she has built within herself. That realization can be profoundly transformative. It invites him to reconsider what love truly is. Not possession, emotional dependency, not becoming the sole source of another person's stability, but two whole individuals choosing one another freely. This woman embodies that truth. She can love deeply without dissolving into the relationship, feel intensely without surrendering her center, because the woman who could not be decentered becomes a living example of emotional integrity. A reminder that the deepest connections are not built on control but on mutual respect. And for a Scorpio man, there are few things more haunting than a woman who cared deeply for him, yet never stopped belonging to herself. Chapter 9: When She Vanishes. There is a moment in some connections when the energy shifts. What once felt alive, charged with possibility, becomes suddenly quiet. The messages stop. Familiar access disappears. Maybe she withdrew after recognizing patterns she could no longer ignore. Maybe she sensed the connection was becoming unhealthy, or perhaps she simply chose to protect her peace. Whatever the reason, there is no dramatic exit, no demands for revenge, no desperate need to be understood. She simply closes the door. And with that, the access he had come to depend upon is gone. What makes her absence so powerful is its completeness. She becomes difficult to reach, difficult to read, to find. The woman who once felt vividly present now seems to have dissolved back into her own private world. For someone accustomed to maintaining emotional awareness of the people who matter to him, that can be deeply disorienting. He no longer knows what she is doing, how she feels, whether she still thinks about him or whether she has already moved on. With so little certainty to hold on to, his imagination begins filling the silence. The connection replays again and again inside his mind, conversations, decisions. The moment everything seemed to change, questions begin to multiply. What is she thinking? Who is she spending time with? Does she miss him? Was there something he failed to understand before she walked away? The more inaccessible she becomes, the larger her presence grows within his inner world. This is one of the paradoxes of human psychology. Physical absence does not always diminish emotional significance. Sometimes it intensifies it. Because she left without compromising her dignity, her departure carries unusual weight. There were no endless arguments, no bargaining with behavior that disturbed her peace. She simply removed herself. That quiet decisiveness can be incredibly impactful. It communicates that her self-respect is stronger than her attachment, that no amount of chemistry will persuade her to remain where she feels unsafe or undervalued. Yet, endings are rarely tidy within the Scorpio psyche. Long after the contact has ceased, she may still remain in his thoughts, Not because he is unable to move forward, but because the connection never felt complete. Her absence becomes part of his internal narrative, a silent space where possibility once lived. And for a Scorpio man, there are few things more haunting than a woman who vanished completely, taking her presence with her while leaving her impact behind. Chapter 10, The Unresolved Story. Some relationships end with clarity. Words are exchanged, feelings are acknowledged. Both people understand what happened and why. Pain may still remain, but there is a sense of completion, a natural place for the mind to rest. Not every connection, however, receives that kind of closure. Some end in ambiguity, in silence, in unanswered questions. And for a Scorpio man, unresolved stories can take on a life of their own. Because Scorpio is a sign that seeks depth and meaning. Significant connections are never experienced superficially. He wants to understand the hidden dynamics beneath what occurred, what was real and what was misunderstood, what might have happened if circumstances had been different. When a meaningful connection ends without definitive resolution, the story rarely ends inside his mind. He revisits the beginning, the chemistry, subtle signals, the moments that seem to carry more significance than either of them openly acknowledged. His attention drifts toward the turning points, the conversations that now feel loaded with unspoken meaning, the opportunities that were missed, the choices he wishes he had made differently. What gives this process its power is the absence of certainty. Without clear answers, imagination finds room to grow, and imagination can be remarkably persistent. The connection remains psychologically open, a question rather than an answer, a possibility rather than a settled memory. He wonders whether she understood how deeply he felt, whether she saw through his guarded behavior, whether she left because she lost interest or because she sensed he was not yet ready. He wonders whether, under different circumstances, they might have built something extraordinary. Those questions do not always demand immediate answers. Sometimes they simply linger, returning unexpectedly, months or even years later. A song, a familiar place, a passing resemblance, almost anything can revive the emotional imprint of what remained unfinished. This is not necessarily about refusing to move on. It is the mind's tendency to remain attached to emotionally significant experiences that never reached a definitive conclusion. The connection becomes suspended in memory, neither fully alive nor entirely gone, preserved in the form of a what if. Few phrases carry as much emotional weight as those two words. What if he had spoken more honestly? What if he had trusted sooner? What if he had recognized her value before she walked away? What if he had been ready? For a Scorpio man, those questions can become part of his internal mythology, not because he wants to suffer, but because the unresolved nature of the story continues to hold emotional meaning. As she becomes associated with possibility, with timing, with the version of himself he might have become, because the story never reached a clear ending, it remains emotionally alive, open-ended, difficult to forget. This is one of the reasons she continues to haunt him. Something significant was left unfinished, and the human psyche has a remarkable way of returning to stories that never received their final chapter. Chapter 11, Why Other Women Feel Different. Life moves forward. New people enter, New conversations begin, new opportunities for connection arise. On the surface, it may appear that he has moved on. He may date, build meaningful relationships, genuinely care for other women. Yet, somewhere in the background, an internal comparison quietly remains. Not because he is trying to hold on to the past, but because certain connections establish a psychological benchmark that is difficult to replace. The woman who haunts a Scorpio man does not become the standard because she was perfect. She becomes the standard because of how she made him feel, how deeply she challenged him, how profoundly she engaged his mind, his emotions, and his sense of possibility. After experiencing a connection that felt unusually layered, ordinary dynamics can feel noticeably different. Not necessarily worse, but less transformative, less psychologically charged, less emotionally significant. Other women may be beautiful, kind, compatible, entirely capable of offering a healthy relationship. And yet something feels different. The same level of intrigue may be missing, the same sense of mystery, the feeling of encountering someone who could neither be rushed nor easily defined. Gradually, he realizes what he misses is not merely her presence. It is the experience of being affected so deeply, wanting to understand someone who remained partially unknown, feeling as though the connection itself was asking him to confront parts of himself he had never fully examined. That combination is difficult to replicate because she was more than an attractive partner. She was a catalyst, a mirror, a challenge to become more emotionally honest and more self aware. When someone plays that role, their impact tends to endure. That does not mean he is incapable of loving someone else. It means that transformative experiences leave lasting impressions. Future relationships are inevitably measured, at least in part, against the emotional significance of what came before. Sometimes that comparison inspires growth. It clarifies what he truly values: authenticity, depth, integrity, emotional maturity. Other times it reveals what is missing when a connection remains largely superficial. He begins noticing the difference between women who seek validation and women who are internally secure, between those who reveal everything immediately and those who unfold gradually, between attraction that feels pleasant and attraction that feels psychologically profound. The woman who haunted him sharpened his understanding of what resonates most deeply. She changed his perception, raised his standards, expanded his emotional expectations. Once that happens, it becomes difficult to return to connections that never engage him at the same depth. This is one of the lasting consequences of meeting someone extraordinary. Even after she is gone, her influence remains. Chapter 12. She becomes his private mythology. With enough time, memory begins to do what memory often does. It distills. Ordinary details begin to fade, while whatever carried the deepest emotional weight remains. The connection becomes less about the day-to-day reality and more about the meaning it came to represent. This is where she begins to take on a mythic quality in his mind. She becomes inseparable from a particular chapter in his life, a chapter defined by longing, possibility, transformation, and the realization that he encountered someone who affected him in ways he did not fully understand. Certain memories remain especially vivid: the way she carried herself, her understated confidence, the emotional restraint, the quiet sense that her world was complete with or without him. He remembers how simple she seemed on the surface, yet how much more complex she became the closer he came to knowing her. He remembers what it felt like to stand before a woman who could not be easily categorized. someone who remained partially unknowable. Over time, those memories begin to merge with symbolism. She no longer represents only herself. She begins to embody a larger idea. The woman who saw him clearly, the woman who challenged his shadow, the woman who required him to earn trust, the woman who could not be controlled, the woman who walked away rather than betray herself. In this way, she becomes part of his personal mythology, a story he returns to when reflecting on his own emotional journey, a reference point that helps him make sense of what he values and what he regrets. The what if, the almost, the I wasn't ready, the she understood me. Those phrases carry emotional weight because they point toward unfinished possibility, and possibility has a way of enduring longer than certainty. Reality is finite. Imagined futures, however, can remain emotionally alive for years. He may wonder what kind of relationship they could have built if circumstances had been different, if he had trusted more deeply, if he had communicated more honestly, if he had been prepared to meet her where she stood. Those reflections are not always expressions of longing for reunion. More often, they become expressions of reverence, an acknowledgement that certain people alter us simply by crossing our path. They become markers in our inner landscape, turning points, lessons, symbols of both what was and what might have been. For a Scorpio man, whose emotional life is often deeply symbolic, that process can feel especially profound. He does not merely remember her, he assigns meaning to her. She becomes associated with a particular kind of truth, the truth that some people arrive to awaken us rather than remain with us, that not every significant connection is meant to become a permanent relationship, and that the people we cannot forget are often the ones who forced us to confront ourselves most honestly. Chapter 13, The Moment He Stops Chasing. There comes a moment in the life of a Scorpio man when something quietly changes. Not outside of him, within him. For a long time, he may have believed that understanding her would finally bring him peace. If he could replay enough conversations, uncover the missing piece, explain why everything unfolded the way it did, perhaps the story would finally feel complete. But some stories never end because they are fully understood. They end because we eventually stop asking them to. That realization rarely arrives all at once. It comes slowly, almost unnoticed. One day he realizes he has gone an entire afternoon without replaying the past. Then a week, then a month. The questions that once demanded answers begin to lose their urgency. Not because they no longer matter, but because they no longer define him. He begins to understand that there are some things no amount of analysis can resolve. Some people arrive with lessons rather than explanations. Some connections leave an imprint that cannot be reduced to a single reason. For someone who has always searched beneath the surface, this can be one of the hardest truths to accept. Not everything hidden is meant to be uncovered. Not every mystery is asking to be solved. Some simply ask to be carried with humility. Looking back, he realizes he spent years trying to understand her, trying to understand what she meant, what she felt, why she walked away. Eventually, another realization begins to emerge. Perhaps those were never the most important questions. The more important question becomes, what did the experience ask of him? Did it make him more honest, more patient, more willing to love without trying to control the outcome, more capable of respecting another person's boundaries as deeply as his own? Those answers matter far more than the ones he once searched for. because they remain with him long after the relationship itself has faded. In the end, he discovers something unexpected. Healing is not forgetting, acceptance is not indifference, and moving forward is not betrayal. He can remember her without needing to reclaim her. He can honor what they shared without wishing to relive it. He can appreciate who she was without asking her to become part of his future. That is the quiet transformation. Not that she disappears from his memory, but that the memory no longer asks anything of him. It simply becomes part of the man he is. Closing chapter, the door remains closed. There comes a point when memory is no longer about another person. It becomes a conversation with yourself. Years later, he may no longer wonder where she is, who she loves, or what became of her life. Those questions eventually fade. The ones that remain are quieter and far more difficult to answer. Did I become the man she believed I could be? Did I finally learn the lesson I was too afraid to face when she stood in front of me? She is the one who revealed who he was before he was ready to see it. She didn't just leave him with memories, she left him with a mirror. And once someone has shown you the parts of yourself you've spent a lifetime hiding, there is no forgetting the reflection. Perhaps that is what haunting really means. It isn't wishing someone would come back. It is carrying the quiet awareness that one person changed the way you understand yourself forever. Some people leave your life, others leave behind a question that follows you through every relationship, every mistake, every season of growth. Am I living differently because they crossed my path? Because the woman he never truly forgets isn't always the greatest love of his life. Sometimes she is simply the woman who arrived at exactly the right moment to reveal the man he still had the potential to become. Whether he ever became that man, only he can answer.